She was a little bit, I don't know, about my complexion, a little bit darker, and she just felt she was so black and that she was treated poorly by her family because of this. Now, this colorism. This is what black people suffer from. Black people go one way, well, we'll run a law against that. Black people go another way, we'll run a law against that. That's why I say wrote and written.
Just giving a little bit of background, you said that God was your hero. So what does that mean to you?
The embrace or love.
Hello, good people. How are you? And we are back to another episode of Sit Down with the Author. I am your host, Miss Y, and we are sitting down again with the lovely, the acclaimed author, Miss K. How are you doing?
Hi, folks. I'm doing well.
How was your week?
You're so generous, like acclaimed and lovely.
Hey, you know what? These words, you look them up and you have the definition, and the definition says miss.
Well, this week was really good. I learned a lot of things this week.
That's good.
Yeah.
Always learning. If you're the smartest person in the room, you need to go to another room. So that is good. So we are here to glean at her feet. We are studying the Emancipated Gospel and looking at the second part of chapter 2, the Dichotomy of American Liberty. So let's go ahead and get started. Last time we were talking about Christian nationalism or nationalism and how it's detrimental. And so that just goes into our next passage. You guys need to go ahead and look at the previous podcast so that we can
like this.
And you need to like, subscribe, all of those things, so you'll know when we're posting again, and so you can just follow along the thread and how we've been discussing and studying this book. So the first passage says, if we follow the logic that fighting for Black freedom is un-American and non-Christian, then Black freedom itself must be un-American and non-Christian. If Black people begin to believe that God created them to be slaves, all would be lost. One word.
Unwoke.
Unwoke. All right.
So I'm going to have to give context for that passage, because Frederick Douglass said that freedom fighters were called infidels.
Mm-hmm.
So being a freedom fighter was un-American.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if you were a slave and you were not a freedom fighter, what kind of a person could you have been?
Right.
Just a slave.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the status quo, or that's what the American or the patriot would have you to be. It just doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody is going to relegate themselves to slavery if they know better.
Right.
So, in the context of American liberty or American nationalism or patriotism, you have slavery. Right now in 2024, many people will deny that. They'll say that a person who is a freedom fighter or woke is reactionary. But slavery was set in the context of the philosophical construct of patriotism, Christian nationalism, and American liberty. And American liberty was not to be imputed upon people who had been made to be chattel or slaves.
Right.
So you're looking at one thing from two different perspectives. One thing from a perspective of a slave or a person who is deemed as a slave, and one person who is deemed as a master or the rightful patriots. So I guess in that context, a person who is Black and is going to be a patriot, that means that they have to be pro-slavery.
Wow. Woke. All right. Passage number 2. Black people had been wedged into a straight place, a narrow road. They were slandered, maligned, and made to bear the brunt of many mistakes that occurred in the making of America, including the attempt to practice Christianity in the context of slavery. And you kind of just spoke on that, but I want to highlight this again.
That's funny how each of these segue into your next.
I know, and I don't set it up like that. I'm just reading, and then I'm like, you know. But I think this is important I want to emphasize this. They were slandered, maligned, and made to bear the brunt of many mistakes that occurred in the making of America, including the attempt to practice Christianity in the context of slavery. One word when you hear that passage, and then I want you to follow that up with, why did you say mistakes that occurred in making America?
Grinding. When I say mistakes, when you're making something, when you're originating something, when something is new, you're gonna make mistakes.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes when we make something, when we're trying something new. So America was something new. So there are gonna be mistakes. When you're creating a bastion of liberty, when you're creating a society for liberty, there are going to be mistakes. But slavery was an egregious error. That was not just a mistake.
Yeah.
That was a negation of somebody's humanity. You can't call that a mistake.
Yeah.
When people keep saying, hey. So, trying to practice Christianity. Now, America is a nation set up as a Christian nation.
Right.
Freedom of religion. Note the operative first word, freedom. Whatever comes behind that is freedom. That means the choice.
Right.
I'm doing some children's books, and one trying to explain this so a child can understand what is freedom.
Right.
Freedom is that space where you are with God and he loves you and you love him unhindered. That's what freedom is. That's not what Christianity was in America.
Right.
Because a black person couldn't read the Bible.
Right.
They could not keep the Sabbath. They could not decide to assemble and praise God. Had to obey their master, even if it was against God, the creator master. So they could not practice Christianity. Further, the slave master wasn't practicing Christianity either. The slave master was standing in the place of God for the slave. So there was idolatry going on here. And we call it American liberty. We call it patriotism, and we call it Christian nationalism. So when I think of the grinding, there's a book called The Keys of This Blood, written by Malachi Martin. Malachi Martin looked at what he calls in this book the end game, where all the people in the world are not, we are the stakes between the Universal Church, which is the Catholic Church, the communists, and the capitalists. 3 world powers in this one world order that will come together to claim people for their kingdom. 3. So he speaks of this grinding of the will of people into the grist that creates this one world government, where these people are not just people who think according to the light of their own conscience, where they are like bricks and mortar that create this new system, or this one world system. I would like to say that God says in the Bible that the church is a building of people. This system is an anti-church system.
Passage number 3. The African American Civil Rights Movement served as a standard for liberty of conscience in creating a space for people to worship God. It created a language that opposed discrimination. One word.
Freedom. So, there's 2 things that are brought out in that passage. 1, liberty of conscience. Every man has to be persuaded in their own mind.
Right.
Christianity is not something, and this is in the context of Christianity. Christianity is not just a rote going to church because people said you should, and or you have to, or you're going to go to hell, or like in Catholicism, you have to, or you're going to burn at the stake.
Mm-hmm.
You have to prove that you're a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
There's a liberty of conscience.
Mm-hmm.
This liberty allows us to be free to worship God.
Mm-hmm.
Worshiping God is, I mean, you don't have to call it Christianity. Mm-hmm. They were first called Christians in Antioch. Mm-hmm. Before that, they were disciples of Christ. Mm-hmm. But worshiping God is a relationship. Okay, mm-hmm. And so when you're talking about liberty of conscience, you're talking about freedom to relate to others as lovers, or mm-hmm. to love others. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then when we look at language that oppose discrimination, we talked about in one earlier program the writing. When an instrument was written, that substantiated it. Mm-hmm. The Declaration of Independence is a writing. Right. The Emancipation Proclamation was a type of writing. Yeah. When laws are on the books, there's a writing which says that it is so. Right. So this civil rights movement, the civil rights movement created a language mm-hmm. that opposed discrimination. Mm-hmm. Whereas sometimes we feel hurt by something, but we don't have any words to say what it is. Yes. Right. But when we learn the words to say what it is, then we can identify it every time. And then when we teach other people what those words mean, we can always identify what it is because we are speaking the same language. Right. Yeah. So Christianity was here. People knew about Christianity. They knew about going to church. They knew about, I'm free to worship as I want to. But the civil rights movement brought it to life. Because as the book says, if there is no liberty for all, there's no lasting liberty for any. So when you have civil rights movement, they weren't just talking about rights for Black people. They were not. The argument was this United States of America is a place for liberty. What about us? We're people. We stand on the same ground you stand on.
So our last passage number 4. Black people were martyrs in the faith of humanity through the civil rights movement and opposed the forced desecration of the body temple by declaring a distinct space for a person to choose to be free.
Fighters. So now, a lot of times when we look at Black people as fighters or freedom fighters, we always think it's just for Black people. This is just the same thing anybody would do if they were slaves. Right. That's not my assertion. Tavis Smiley, who used to be on BET, mm-hmm. he wrote a book, something like a contract with America, mm-hmm. or I can't think of it. Mm-hmm. But he said, when you make America better, when you make Black America better, you make all America better. So Black people were martyrs in the faith of humanity, that we should all be free. So the concept is that we're not just martyrs for Black people. Harriet Tubman, like we said before, was not just a freedom fighter for Black people. She fought for America. Soldier of Truth was just not a freedom fighter for Black people. She fought for women's suffrage as well. We're not just fighting for themselves, even though it might look like it. I mean, mm-hmm. we have to fight for freedom, but that's not what it ended up being. Mm-hmm. Even Harriet Tubman, when she was a lead conductor on the Underground Railroad, it wasn't just for herself. Mm-hmm. When she freed herself, she went back, got more people. When she freed them, she went to the lines of the Northerners and fought for. She was a spy. Mm-hmm. It wasn't. She wanted to do away with the tyranny of slavery. For everybody, for the country. Mm-hmm. Soldier of Truth herself, she wasn't just a freedom fighter for herself. She fought for her son to get out of slavery, but she fought for women's suffrage, for women to have the right to vote. So that wasn't just her issue. Frederick Douglass, he fought for himself, certainly, but he went to speak in Scotland. You know, in those days, you couldn't speak in America too loudly, but he went to Europe. Now, I want you to think about this. The Statue of Liberty, and this is what I've read somewhere, that the first statue was sent. Now we all know it was sent from France, but the first statue was a statue of a black woman. And France sent the statue to America as a congratulatory gesture for freeing the slaves. America sent that statue back. Could you rework this, please? That's what we weren't trying to do that, but I mean, we did it. But France congratulated America for freeing their slaves, for liberty, and that's why they sent them a black woman. So when France saw what Black Americans were doing, they didn't see it as something just to free themselves. They saw it as something to actually put America in the right light. This is what liberty looks like, for real.
Yeah, we messed up. That wasn't cool. And not that there hasn't continued to be mishaps and mistakes, because we're all human. But they have publicly said, hey, this was wrong. This was wrong what we did. Not so much in America. Maybe that's my opinion.
So I don't know. I mean, I'm not. I think it's a pretty deep well, but I want to look at the connection between France and America in this regard. When you're looking at religious liberty in America, France. So before America was established as a bastion of religious liberty, you had Europe being under the straitjacket hold of the Catholic Church. And it was France that deposed the Pope and killed him. And the Bible calls it a deadly wound. And they exalted the goddess of reason. And they were about liberty. They became an atheistic space. So they were about liberty. So America, in continuance of what France did, became a bastion of religious liberty. So in a sense, they were acting in conjunction to pull down this tyranny of making people worship the way you think they should worship. So France saw the brotherhood or the sisterhood in this what they had. I mean, France was atheistic. America was a religion. They were Christians. But there were some things they had in common, and that was this liberty thing. Now, we did look at this patriotism, which wasn't quite Christianity. So it was a strange sort of mix. So France had this kinship with the United States. So it was easy for them to send them the statue. Congratulations, brother. You believe in liberty just like us. And America said, well, not that kind of liberty. So, yeah, it gets sort of peculiar. But that is an observation that Black people were not just servants of Black people. They were seen on the world stage, and they meant something on the world stage. Peculiarly, they meant, I know that word got a little mixed up, but they meant something on the world stage. They went and fought in World War II. Black people fought in World War II in Europe. They were respected in Europe, but they came back to America and they were castigated for wearing uniforms as soldiers. So there was a strange thing that was happening in America. Whereas Black people were recognized in Europe as the Moors. They were recognized as princes and kings. But when you look at the art in America, the Black faces that were there originally, the original people, were defaced. There's a big thing that happened to Black people in America about wiping us off the map of human history. What was that about? I still can't say I know.
We talked about the mistakes of making a country. So sometimes when people make mistakes, there's different ways you can own up to that. You can say, yeah, I messed up, I'm sorry. Or let me erase that. Let me hide that. Let me act like it didn't happen.
The problem is that it goes so deep you can try to erase it and deface it, but every time you pull up, there's so much evidence of Black people being in the depths of humanity. The erasure that happened is that we were, I don't know, people actually thought that we would never read anything outside of American books or outside of what we saw in school. The erasure that happened is like, you guys were created to be slaves, and I don't know, you just came from heathen people in Africa, and that's all we know. And that's all there is. And that's a very simplistic view of humanity and the world.
Technical issues today. Just been cut off mid-conscious stream, but we're going to attempt to close this out now. We were discussing about the defacture of, and I don't even know if that's a word, but defacing.
Defacism. Taking the face off of Black images,
and just talking about how when you make a mistake, you can own up to it, or you can erase it and act like it didn't happen. Because if you say it happened, then there's some reparations that need to be had, and I'm not exactly sure that reparations have been had. So you were commenting on that, talking about
the cover up.
Yeah.
So to say that, I just looked at in my research, I've seen Black faces in Germany, not Black faces like we see the Sambo. We're talking about statues with Black people, paintings with Black people that were from Africa, that are in Europe. We are talking about Christian pictures. We're talking about historical pictures that you don't see in America, that have been defaced. They have redone these pictures, and they look like white face. So I'm looking at this, that when you want to change this history, like you said, you might deface it so you don't have to own up to a mistake. But how far are you going to put the whiteness in the face? It goes deep. These historical paintings, these historical writings take us totally back to Africa, not Africa, which you would have us to believe were savages. We're talking about people who wrote the first books, built the first buildings, and no one can tell us how those pyramids were built. No one has ever built anything like a pyramid. Those pyramids, one researcher, anthropologist, and theologist said, were the houses of God. And those pyramids are under all the sand in the desert. Those pyramids came to the United States of America. So when you're defacing these pictures and saying, no, they were all white people, you have to go really deep, and you can't go that deep. But to think about it, many white people actually believe this. It's not just Black people that believe this. White people believe that Black people's history goes into the bushes where there were savages. White people believe that too. Many white people believe that. And that's a travesty. And so when you go back to Black people being martyrs in the faith of humanity, that is to give white people knowledge too of who we all are. If we're Christians, we believe we all came from one place. Where? Wherever that ark was. It wasn't in America. It wasn't in Europe. It was where everybody else was. It was where the Hebrews were slaves. They were in Africa. The Hebrews were in Africa. You just come down a little bit to where the ark was before Abraham traveled out of the Ur of the Chaldees and came into the land of Egypt. It wasn't Europe. It wasn't America. Okay. They were Afro-Asiatics.
Unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, our episode was cut short. I hope you gleaned something special from the episode. And until next time, this has been Sit Down with the Author. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Sit Down with the Author. I have been your host, Miss Y, and we are discussing the Emancipated Gospel. Please tune in next time. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video. Until next time, the Emancipated Gospel.